When I first moved into the apartment, I thought the creaks and groans of the old building were charming, the kind of quirks that gave the place character. The ceilings were high, with water stains blooming like faded flowers in the corners. The floors were scuffed hardwood, their uneven boards squeaking under every step. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and for someone just starting out, that was enough. For the first few nights, the noises barely registered. A thump here, a creak there. It's what you'd expect in a building that had probably stood for half a century. But by the end of the first week, those noises started to take on a pattern. It was always late at night. I'd be lying on the couch, the glow of the TV washing over the room, when I'd hear it. A faint rhythmic sound coming from above. I told myself it was just the building settling, or maybe even a raccoon. But there was a deliberate quality to it, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. The third night it was louder. I muted the TV and held my breath listening. My eyes flicked to the ceiling. I was on the top floor. There was no one above me, at least no one living there. The next day I casually mentioned it to my landlord, an older man named Rick, who always smelled faintly of paint thinner. He laughed it off. "Old buildings make old noises," he said, waving me off with a smile. "Probably squirrels in the attic. I'll take a look when I have time." But days turned into weeks and the noises didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. One night I woke up to a loud thump directly above my bed. My heart raced as I stared at the ceiling. The sound was closer than ever before, and I could swear I heard faint movement. Footsteps, maybe. My skin crawled, the kind of primal fear that's hard to explain. I tried to ignore it, but sleep was impossible. The next morning, exhausted and desperate, I decided to check for myself. I dragged my rickety stepladder into the hallway and climbed up to the attic hatch. My hands trembled as I reached for the latch. With one sharp tug, the hatch creaked open, releasing a puff of stale, musty air. The attic was dark, a cavernous void of cobwebs and shadows. I held up my phone flashlight, sweeping the beam across the space. Dust motes danced in the light, and the air was thick with the scent of damp wood. At first I didn't see anything, just insulation, a few empty boxes, and a pile of old blankets shoved into a corner. But as I climbed higher, my foot brushed against something hard. A plate, with crumbs. My chest tightened. The plate was clean enough to suggest it hadn't been there long. I scanned the area again, and this time my light caught something tucked into the blankets. A plastic water bottle, half full. I climbed down in a rush, heart pounding. I called Rick immediately, and to his credit, he came over within the hour. Together we checked the attic more thoroughly. He found a small makeshift bed hidden under the insulation, along with a pile of empty food wrappers. "A squatter probably," he said, shaking his head. "Don't worry, I'll nail the hatch shut. They won't be coming back." It sounded reasonable, but my unease didn't fade. Who had been up there? How long had they been watching me? The following nights were quiet, and I started to feel like maybe it was over. But then a week later, it happened. I was asleep in bed when I heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not from the ceiling this time, but from inside my closet. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was pitch dark, but I could see the outline of the closet door, slightly ajar. I reached for my phone, the glow of the screen casting weak light across the room. My thumb hovered over the call button for 911, but I hesitated. Was I imagining this? But then the knocking came back again, louder this time. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy ceramic lamp, and crept toward the closet. My hand shook as I reached for the door. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes, hangers swaying slightly, as if disturbed. My chest heaved with relief, and I almost laughed at myself. I closed the door and climbed back into bed. That's when I saw it. The attic hatch was open. I froze, staring at the dark rectangle in the ceiling. Slowly, a shadow moved at the edge of the opening. And then a face appeared. I screamed and bolted for the door, hearing the sound of someone scrambling down from the attic behind me. I didn't look back. The police came within minutes, but by the time they arrived, the intruder was gone. They found a trail of debris leading out of my apartment and into the alley behind the building. When I returned with an officer, I saw what I had missed before, a stack of Polaroid photos hidden under the pile of blankets in the attic. There were photos of me, sleeping, eating, watching TV, and in the very last one, I wasn't alone. I came home later than usual that night. It had been a long day at work, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, the neighbourhood was cloaked in darkness. Most houses had their lights off, save for the occasional flicker of a TV screen through curtained windows. I parked, grabbed my bag, and headed to the door. The night air was cold, the kind that made you walk a little faster just to get inside. I unlocked the door, stepped in, and locked it behind me with a satisfying click. The silence of the house was a relief. I kicked off my shoes, tossed my keys on the counter, and made my way to the living room. I didn't notice anything was wrong at first. The house felt normal, just like it always did. I turned on a lamp in the corner, its soft glow barely cutting through the shadows, and collapsed onto the couch. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from a news app I'd been meaning to uninstall. I ignored it and scrolled through my feed aimlessly, trying to unwind. But then I heard something. A soft creak. It came from somewhere behind me, so faint that at first I thought I'd imagined it. I paused, holding my breath, my eyes flicking toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. Silence. Probably just the house settling, I thought, shaking my head. I returned to my phone, forcing myself to focus on the screen. 15 minutes passed. I didn't hear the creak again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The kind of feeling you can't explain, just a gnawing sense that you're being watched. I told myself I was being ridiculous. To prove it, I stood up and walked around the house, checking each door and window. Everything was locked, just as I'd left it. By the time I finished, I felt a little better. I laughed at myself under my breath, grabbed a drink from the fridge, and decided to call it a night. I didn't notice the first sign until I was brushing my teeth. The bathroom mirror was fogged from the hot water, and when I wiped it clean, I saw something behind me, just a glimpse of movement in the reflection. I turned around quickly, my heart racing, but the hallway was empty. "You're just tired," I told myself. "Your mind is playing tricks." But as I walked to my bedroom, the feeling of being watched came rushing back. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. I locked my bedroom door before climbing into bed. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up hours later to a soft noise. A faint rustling sound like fabric brushing against fabric. I froze. The sound wasn't outside. It wasn't the wind or the pipes or the creak of the house. It was inside my bedroom. My throat tightened as I strained to hear more. The sound stopped, and the silence pressed in around me like a weight. I reached for my phone, barely daring to move, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the chair in the corner of the room. Someone was sitting there. My breath hitched as the light illuminated the figure. A man in dark clothing, his face obscured by shadows, sitting perfectly still, watching me. For a moment, neither of us moved. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Who?" I started, but before I could finish, he lunged. I screamed, scrambling out of bed as he grabbed for me. The flashlight tumbled to the floor, casting wild shadows across the walls as I bolted for the door. My hands fumbled with the lock, adrenaline surging as I yanked it open and ran down the hallway. Behind me, I could hear his heavy footsteps, closing the gap between us. I made it to the front door, throwing it open and sprinting out into the street. I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbour's house, pounding on the door and shouting for help. The police arrived within minutes. They found him hiding in my bedroom closet, a knife tucked into his jacket pocket. He didn't say much when they dragged him out, but I couldn't stop shaking as I watched them take him away. The officers told me later that he'd likely slipped in while I was unlocking the door, slipping past me in the split second before I turned the lock. I haven't slept properly since. Every creak, every shadow feels like him, waiting. And I'll never forget the way he looked at me from the corner of that room, like he'd been there all along, just waiting for the right moment. When my best friend Jake asked me to house sit for him while he was away, I didn't think twice about saying yes. We'd been close for years. college friends turned confidants, and I trusted him completely. "Just feed the fish and don't let the plants die," he joked as he handed me the keys. His laugh was easy, his demeanour casual, and I had no reason to doubt him. His house was nice, almost too nice for someone who lived alone. A sleek modern 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive furniture. Bachelor pad didn't quite cover it. "Make yourself at home," he'd said, and I did. The first 2 days were uneventful. I spent my time lounging on the couch, watching movies and scrolling through my phone. I even FaceTimed Jake to show him how his plants were doing, laughing as he critiqued my watering technique. "You're a lifesaver," he said, grinning through the screen. "Thanks for doing this." That night, after a long bath in his luxurious bathroom, I stood in front of the mirror brushing my hair. That's when I noticed it. A small black dot in the corner of the ceiling. At first I thought it was just a sensor, maybe for smoke or motion detection. But something about its placement felt wrong. It was angled slightly downward, pointing directly at the sink and mirror. I frowned, stepping closer. My chest tightened as I realised it wasn't a sensor. It was a camera. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was part of a home security system. But why would someone put a camera in the bathroom? A cold unease crept over me as I scanned the room. That's when I noticed another one, this time near the shower head. My heart started to race. I wrapped a towel around myself and bolted out of the bathroom, my mind spinning. I wanted to believe Jake had a reason for this, something innocent I hadn't thought of. But as I stood in the hallway staring back at the bathroom door, another thought took hold. What if he'd been watching me? I tried to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. Determined to prove myself wrong, I went into the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to the ceiling, the corners, anywhere a small camera might hide. And then I saw it. Another black dot embedded in the smoke detector above the bed. My stomach churned. Panic set in. I grabbed my phone and searched online for hidden cameras in homes. The results were terrifying. It wasn't just the size of the cameras, they could be hidden in anything. Alarm clocks, outlets, even picture frames. I went through the house, tearing through every room, checking every corner. They were everywhere. One in the living room bookshelf pointed at the couch. Another in the corner of the bedroom closet, aimed directly at the bed. And worse, they weren't just cameras. They were connected to a tiny, concealed network router tucked behind his entertainment centre. I stood there staring at the blinking lights on the router and realised the truth. Jake had been recording everything. I felt sick. My hands shook as I packed my things, desperate to leave. But as I grabbed my bag, I noticed something else. My underwear drawer had been rifled through. I hadn't touched it since I'd arrived. I left that night, locking the door behind me and driving straight to my apartment. I didn't call Jake. I couldn't. Instead, I went to the police. The officer who took my statement listened patiently as I explained everything. The cameras, the router, the invasive placement. They took it seriously, telling me they'd investigate immediately. A few days later, I got a call from the detective assigned to the case. "You were right to come to us," he said grimly. "We found extensive footage on the network, including videos of you." My stomach dropped. "And it wasn't just you," he continued. "There are other women. Dates, house guests, people who probably never realised they were being recorded. Jake was arrested the next day. I haven't spoken to him since, and I don't think I ever will. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Someone I trusted, someone I thought I knew, had been violating my privacy in ways I couldn't even comprehend. Even now, I can't stay in a room without scanning for cameras. Every shadow, every corner, feels like it's watching me. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder how many other people Jake might have done this to, or how many other Jakes are out there, hiding behind their charm, waiting for their next victim. When my Aunt Linda asked me to watch her house while she was out of town for a week, I didn't think twice about saying yes. We'd always been close. She was more like an older sister than an aunt. At 35, Linda was independent, sharp, and hard-working. Her job as a project manager kept her busy, and she loved it. Linda never married, never had kids, and never seemed to mind. Her house was her pride and joy, spotless, cosy, and filled with little reminders of the life she'd built for herself. I'd house sat for her before, and it was always peaceful. But this time something felt off. The first night passed without incident. I sprawled on her couch, watching TV and raiding her pantry for snacks. Her house was one of those places that always smelled faintly of lavender, and felt just a little too quiet at night. It was the second evening when things began to nag at me. I was in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner when I noticed the back door lock wasn't turned all the way. I paused, staring at it. I was certain I'd locked it earlier. I even remembered twisting the bolt and double-checking, just like I always did. Still, I shrugged it off. Maybe I'd gotten distracted. Later that evening, while heading upstairs to brush my teeth, I noticed the guest bedroom door was partially closed. I stopped. I distinctly remembered leaving it wide open earlier that day. I stared at the door for a long moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the draft from an open window had pushed it shut. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark and silent. Everything looked normal, bed made, windows closed, but something about the stillness made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I backed out of the room and locked the door to the bedroom I was staying in before crawling into bed. For a guy who wasn't afraid of much, I suddenly felt the weight of the silence pressing down on me. Around 2 a.m, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. My phone slipped from my hands, landing on the floor with a dull clunk. I groaned, leaning over the edge of the bed to reach for it. My hand froze as it brushed against something unexpected. Shoes. A pair of them, neatly placed where they shouldn't be. Not my shoes, dirty sneakers, old and scuffed, with untied laces. The kind that belonged to someone who had been running. And then in the dim light, I saw something else. A face. The man's chest rose and fell slowly as he lay perfectly still, like a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced myself to think. I didn't scream. I knew that if I startled him, I might lose whatever advantage I had. I slowly pushed myself up, my hands trembling, and grabbed the metal lamp from the nightstand. I backed toward the door, moving carefully, as if I hadn't noticed anything unusual. My steps were deliberate, my breathing steady, trying to pretend that nothing was wrong. But as soon as my foot hit a creaky floorboard, the man moved. He scrambled out from under the bed in one terrifying motion, lunging straight for me. I swung the lamp as hard as I could. It hit him square in the shoulder, the metal cracking loudly against bone. He let out a pained grunt but didn't stop. He barreled into me, knocking us both to the ground. The lamp skidded across the floor as we grappled. I'd like to say I wasn't scared, but I was. Terrified, actually. But I'm a big guy, 6'3" and solid from years of construction work. I wasn't about to let him win. He punched and clawed, trying to wriggle free, but I pinned him down, forcing all my weight onto him. His breath was ragged, and his movements grew weaker as I held him there. "Who the hell are you?" I shouted, my voice hoarse. He didn't answer. His bloodshot eyes just glared up at me with a mix of hatred and something else I couldn't place. Disappointment. The police arrived minutes after my frantic 911 call. They pulled the man out of the house in handcuffs while I sat on the bottom stair, still catching my breath. It wasn't until the next day that I found out who he was. The man had been stalking Linda for months. The police found a backpack hidden in the guest room closet, and what they uncovered sent chills down my spine. Ropes, duct tape, a knife, and photos of Linda taken from afar. There were notes detailing her schedule, her habits, and even a spare key to the house. They told me he'd been breaking in regularly, watching her while she slept, cooked, and went about her life completely unaware. He'd been sneaking in and out for months, carefully avoiding detection. But that night, the night I showed up to house sit, was different. He wasn't just hiding anymore. This time he had come with a plan. When I arrived, it must have thrown him off, forced him to hide under the bed, waiting for the moment he could act. He wasn't there to slip away unnoticed. He was waiting for Linda. When I called Linda to tell her what had happened, she didn't say anything at first. Finally, she whispered. I knew something was wrong. She'd felt watched for weeks, but hadn't wanted to believe it. She moved out of the house not long after, and I don't blame her. For me, that night plays in my mind like a tape on repeat. The shoes under the bed, the eyes staring back at me. The moment he moved, every time I drop something and lean down to pick it up, I find myself hesitating. I always check under the bed now. But what haunts me even more is the question I can't escape. What if Linda had been there instead of me? What if she had leaned down, unaware of the danger waiting in the shadows? I'll never forget what I saw that night, or the chilling thought of what could have happened if it wasn't me who walked through that door. When my mum left town to visit my aunt and Dad got stuck working late shifts for the week, I wasn't too worried about being home alone. At 16, I'd done it a dozen times before, and besides, I liked the freedom. Eating whatever I wanted, staying up late and binge-watching horror movies until I couldn't keep my eyes open. The only rule was simple: lock the doors and stay inside. The first night was easy. I sprawled out on the couch with popcorn and wasted hours watching movies. Nothing happened. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I usually found comforting. But the second night was different. It started with something small. When I came home from school that afternoon, the air inside felt wrong. It was subtle, like the house had been disturbed just slightly. I couldn't explain it, but the first thing I did was check the doors and windows. Everything was locked. Deadbolts, latches, everything. I told myself I was being paranoid. I tried to shrug it off, but later that evening, as I was making dinner, I noticed something strange. The door to the hallway closet was cracked open. I knew I hadn't opened it. I froze, staring at it, waiting for something to happen. For the longest moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the fridge. Then I shook myself and laughed nervously. You're being stupid, I thought. Maybe Dad had left it open when he grabbed his coat that morning. Still, I walked over and shut it, firmly, and around 10 p.m. I was curled up on the couch with my blanket, half watching a movie while scrolling through my phone. It was raining outside now, the steady patter on the windows soothing. Then I heard it, a soft creak upstairs. I froze, my thumb hovering over the phone screen. The sound was so faint I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate shift on the floorboards. It was the kind of sound someone makes when they're trying to move quietly. I turned off the TV and sat in the silence, straining to hear more. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I kept telling myself it was nothing. Just the house settling. Just the wind. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. I grabbed my phone and walked to the base of the stairs, peering up into the dark hallway. "Hello?" I called out softly. My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the silence of the house. Nothing. Still, I felt that sick, crawling sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, my body on edge. I stood there for a long time, staring into the blackness of the hall, waiting for something to happen. Finally, I convinced myself to go upstairs and check. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't look now, I'd never sleep. I crept up slowly, gripping my phone like it was a weapon. The hallway was dark and the doors to the bedrooms were all closed. My heart pounded as I checked my room. Nothing. The guest room, empty. I was about to turn back when I noticed it. The door to the hallway closet was open again. Wide open. I stopped dead, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't remember leaving it like that earlier. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer. The closet was dark inside, its slats showing only shadows. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling. As I pulled it open, the light from the hallway spilled inside. And there he was. My uncle. He was crouched in the back corner of the closet, his wide eyes staring up at me through the dark. His face was pale and twisted into a sick grin, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Hi, Jamie," he whispered. I screamed. Before I could move, he lunged at me, grabbing my wrist with a grip so tight it felt like my bones would snap. "Let go of me," I cried, trying to pull away. But he was strong, too strong. He dragged me back into the hallway, shoving me against the wall. I could smell him. Sweat, alcohol, something sour and rotten. "You're so pretty now," he muttered, his face inches from mine. His voice was soft, sickeningly gentle. I kicked and fought, screaming at the top of my lungs. My hands clawed at his arms, desperate to break free, but he pinned me hard against the wall. "Stop fighting," he growled, his voice breaking. "Stop!" And then I heard it. The front door opened. "Jamie!" My dad's voice boomed through the house. For a split second, everything stopped. My uncle's head whipped toward the stairs, his grip loosening just enough. I shoved him with all my strength, and he stumbled back, slamming into the wall. I ran. I bolted down the stairs, tears streaming down my face as I practically flew into the living room. My dad was standing there, his work boots still on, his face twisted in confusion and panic. "Dad, he's upstairs," I sobbed, and then we heard it, my uncle's footsteps pounding down the stairs. My dad's expression shifted in an instant. Without a word, he moved past me, his massive frame blocking the hallway as my uncle barreled into view. There was no escape, my dad's voice furious and roaring, and my uncle's slurred protests. I curled up on the couch, hands pressed over my ears, trying to block it all out. By the time the police arrived, my uncle was on the floor, his face bloodied and his hands zip-tied behind his back. My dad stood over him, fists clenched, chest heaving. The police took my uncle away that night. They told us later that he'd been spiralling for months, fixating on my mum before turning his attention to me. He'd been in the house all day, hiding, waiting for the right moment. That night I didn't sleep. My dad sat with me on the couch until morning, his hand on my shoulder, neither of us saying much. To this day I still can't stand closets. I check them constantly, always half expecting to see someone crouched inside, waiting. And sometimes when I'm home alone and hear the faintest creak of a floorboard, I remember the sound of his voice, soft and low, whispering my name. And I hope I never hear it again. I've always considered myself a light sleeper, someone who wakes up at the faintest sound. A creak in the hallway, the distant hum of a passing car, anything could pull me out of sleep. It's something I've always been proud of. Nothing gets past me. But on that morning, when I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from my back door into my house, I realised how wrong I was. It was a little after 7 a.m. when I first noticed them. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels almost off, like something's missing. I padded into the kitchen to make coffee, still groggy from sleep when I saw it. The back door was slightly ajar. I stopped in my tracks, every nerve in my body suddenly on edge. I distinctly remembered locking it the night before. I always locked it. It was second nature. Twist the deadbolt, yank the handle to check, then off to bed. But now it was open, and leading away from it were muddy footprints. The prints started just outside the door and continued inside, trailing across the linoleum of the kitchen floor before disappearing into the living room carpet. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach as I stared at them. The prints were large, too big to be mine. I took a shaky breath, trying to stay calm. Maybe it's nothing, I told myself. Maybe I forgot to lock the door and a raccoon got in. But as I followed the trail, my gut told me something worse had happened. The footprints didn't meander. They didn't double back. They moved purposefully, straight through the kitchen, into the living room and down the hallway, toward my bedroom. I stopped in the doorway of my room, staring at the floor. The muddy footprints ended right next to my bed. My blood turned to ice. My bed, the one I'd been sleeping in for 8 hours, looked untouched, exactly as I'd left it when I climbed in. I slowly turned my head to the spot on the floor. The footprints didn't just stop there. The mud was smeared, like someone had been standing there, watching me. I backed out of the room, my breathing ragged. I needed to know what had happened, even though part of me didn't want to. I went straight for the living room, where my small security camera system was set up. I'd installed it months ago, after a string of burglaries in the neighbourhood. I'd never had to check the footage before. My hands trembled as I rewound the feed to the night before. The screen flickered for a moment, and then I saw it. My backyard, dimly lit by the floodlight I'd installed above the porch. At 3:12 a.m, something moved at the edge of the camera's view. A man. He stepped into the light, and I swear my heart stopped. He was tall, wearing dirty jeans, and a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. I watched as he approached the back door and, with almost practiced ease, jimmied it open. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. I fast-forwarded, my stomach in knots, until I saw him again, inside the house now. The living room camera caught him walking slowly across the room, his muddy boots leaving the same trail I'd found. And then he stopped. He turned his head toward the hallway, toward my bedroom. I switched to the hallway feed, bile rising in my throat as I watched him move down the corridor, step by step. The camera in my bedroom caught him next. I had placed it in the corner of the room, angled at the door. He appeared in the doorway like a shadow, his figure blotting out the faint light from the hall. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. The man walked into my room. He moved to the side of the bed, to the very spot where the footprints had ended, and then he just stood there, watching me. The man didn't move. He just stood at my bedside, staring down at me as I slept. I watched the footage, horrified, as minutes turned into hours. He never shifted, never fidgeted. He was perfectly still, like a statue. And then at 5:47 a.m, the man turned away. But before he left, something made me pause the video. In his right hand, clutched loosely at his side, was a knife. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing. The man had been in my room, inches from me, holding a knife for over 2 hours. And I hadn't woken up. I didn't hear him come in. I didn't hear him leave. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. What would have happened if I'd woken up? I leaned back on the couch, my skin cold and clammy. He had the knife for a reason. He had come inside for a reason. But something had stopped him. What? Did he lose his nerve? Did he think I'd wake up? Or worse, was he just waiting for another night? I called the police immediately. They arrived within minutes, combing through the house for evidence and taking my statement. I showed them the footage, watching as their faces hardened. One of the officers pulled me aside. "You're lucky," he said grimly. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice unsteady. He didn't answer me at first. Instead, he looked at the screen, where the man stood over my bed, knife in hand, frozen in eerie stillness. Finally, he spoke, his tone low and weighted. "That man's a fugitive. He's done this before. Broke into another house a few months back. The guy who lived there woke up. His phone buzzed with a notification in the middle of the night." The officer paused, his jaw tightening. "The man didn't make it. He was stabbed to death before he even had a chance to react." My stomach churned as the gravity of his words hit me. "If you'd woken up," the officer said quietly, "we might be dealing with the same outcome right now." The police never found him. They said he was likely a drifter or someone who knew how to cover his tracks. I replaced the locks, upgraded the security system, and put bars on the windows, but none of it really helped, because every night since then I lie in bed and stare at the corner of the room where he stood. I wonder what he was thinking as he watched me, as he clutched that knife, and I wonder how long it'll be before he tries again, because someone who does that doesn't stop. Thank you for joining us for these chilling Home Alone horror stories. Each one is a reminder that the scariest moments don't always come from the supernatural, but from the all-too-real dangers lurking just out of sight. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more terrifying tales, be sure to check out our other videos. We've got plenty of stories that will keep you up at night. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another spine-chilling upload. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the scariest thing in the dark isn't your imagination.